Hello, my name is Adriana Uribe, and today I'm gonna be doing my ethics presentation. I will be starting with talking about the 7 recurring ethical problems in the criminal justice field. The first problem is personal gain, which involves unlawful personal gain that can be described as officers obtaining personal information of people, like addresses and phone numbers. It can also be described as them taking bribes and receiving compensations or benefits in return. In addition, personal gain can also come in accepting gratitude. The examples that I will be providing for personal gain is an Ohio officer that was punished for stalking an ex-girlfriend and looking up information on her. He also obtained addresses of women who he found attractive during stops. Another example is officers collecting money for not issuing a citation, and officers working at the scene of a traffic stop, giving an injured woman the business card of the clinic where he worked as a second job. The second ethical problem in the criminal justice field is favoritism and bias. It is described as a racial, ethnic, and religious bias. It can also be as family favoritism and discrimination among races, while it can also come as officers using excessive force with people of color. There was a specific case where a spouse of a police officer committed a minor act of breaking the law. Obviously, they could have been charged with an arrest. However, the officer applied favoritism and decided not to follow the law since since she was the spouse of an officer as well. And another example is officers extending professional courtesies. The third ethical problem is abuse of power. Abuse of power can come in many ways, such as harassment, arranging unjustified arrest, seeking to deny reasonable bail, and the denial of liberty by lengthy detention. It can also be by applying too much force in an arrest, and it can also be as official misconduct by an officer. I would like to share my example for abuse of power. It would be that an officer detained a 32-year-old man who was sitting in his car. He charged him for being a pedophile and wouldn't allow him to use his cell phone. He ordered him out of his car and pat him down. When the man refused, the officer pointed a gun at his head and arrested him. The officer was then charged with 8 counts, including making a false declaration for initially providing the short form of his name as of Mike instead of Michael. So I see this as an officer abusing his power because he didn't have enough proof that the 32-year-old man was guilty of what he believed and was charged, which is pedophile. He then continued with the arrest without having any proof. So I do believe that in this case, the officer did abuse his power. The fourth ethical problem in the criminal justice field can be as flawed personal life. This can come by criminal wrongdoing, officers breaking the law, civil law violations, and private expressions and actions through social media. It can also be as sexual misconduct. So my examples are an officer being involved in domestic violence or assault. Another example that I have is an officer Hayward that was let go as an officer because he was witnessed hitting another woman at the bar, who was later identified as his wife. Officers who are arrested for fighting in public places can also be an example of a flawed personal life. The fifth problem in the criminal justice is deceitfulness, fraudulence, and prevarication behavior. This can come by officers lying and covering up misdeeds, and it can also involve officers involved in fraud. So the example that I would like to provide is the California Highway Patrol suspended the police powers of thousands of officers after discovering they got overtime pay for thousands of unworked hours. An investigation uncovered the officers obtained the monetary pay in a fraudulent overtime pay that was approved by their supervising sergeants. The sixth recurring ethical problem is denial of due process. It involves ignoring civil rights, not following the agency rules and procedures, also failing to comply with the agency rules, and depriving liberty or property without the due process of law. My example involves a case, the case of Carey and Fibus, which involved public schools officials violating a student's procedural due process rights under the 14th Amendment. The students proved that the officials were unjustified in their actions and that an actual injury had occurred. The students received a 20-day suspension for smoking marijuana on school grounds. Another student named Briscoe was also denied a hearing or other form of procedural due process for wearing an earring to school, that according to officials was a sign of gang activity. The seventh and last ethical problem is the neglect of duties, disobeying lawful orders, also abusing our discretion, and sharing sensitive information. Officers can also be involved in the neglecting their duties by failing to comply with the agency regulations and standing orders. So examples can be officers not conducting an arrest, of course, in the proper way or the way that they were trained. Officers only responding to certain calls, and officers not obeying orders from their supervisors. So this question is to determine which of the 7 recurring problems in criminal justice apply to each of the 4 problems that you experience as a sheriff. I believe that the one problem that applied to all was the abuse of power and applying too much force. After carefully analyzing the 7 recurring problems, I concluded that the most common nowadays is officers applying too much force that later results in a mass shooting and innocent people dying. Excessive use of force or police brutality. Black people are disproportionately stopped and harassed by police. A collective data shows black drivers being stopped at a rate of 80% higher than white drivers. In some cases, officers utilize racial discrimination bias to apply excessive force to certain people. Officers involved in shootings. There is a case that it is still under investigation that happened in the San Benito, Texas area. A 17-year-old juvenile was reckless driving a vehicle. Since he was not coming to a stop after being told by the police decided to shoot. The 17-year-old male died at the scene from his wounds. He was unarmed and was not seen as a threat to the officers who shot fire. The case is under review, and they are considering if they are gonna find the officer guilty. If they do, he's gonna face a lengthy time in the jail. Bias policing and racial profiling. Officers targeting people based on their ethnicity and race. And of course, officers dealing with the media. Some officers share too much information, especially on social media. They abuse their power and think that they have the authority to release sensitive information. Many officers share too much information that later results in invading people's privacy. Officers also abuse their power by manipulating the data that is later released to the media. And these are my references. Thank you.